Welcome. Hola. My name is Michelle Sturm-Gonzalez. I am the current director at Sweetwater Special Services. Just to give you a little history of my background, I started off actually going to school in Michigan. My husband and I were married, lived in Tijuana for about 5 years. And then we ended up going to Michigan, and I completed a credentialing program at Michigan State University and started teaching there in 2nd grade and then did middle school. Then in 2003, I came here, and in 2003 started at Montgomery High School. And in fact, I had the classroom next door. And then I had a classroom over there and a classroom down here. When I first started, I had a little cart that I had to take around with me. I've taught in the mild moderate setting, and then also I've taught in what we call our moderate setting for students who have more moderate disabilities or on certificate of completion, and even worked in transition. Then I went to the district office. I was a teacher on special assignment that supported other teachers throughout the district. I was one of the only bilingual special education teachers at the time, which might seem surprising being a border town, but there weren't that many at the time. So I developed curriculum to support English learners in who have disabilities. After that, I became a program manager. My title officially at the district office was for college, career, and community readiness. It was really all about transitions, helping students and families through these transitions, because just like all students, they can be difficult, but specifically for students with disabilities, having an understanding of what's available in the community or within the school district and how to access it can be confusing and frustrating sometimes. I went from there then and became, for about just 1 year, I was a county coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Ed. And I specialized in, of course, special education and supported all the districts in South Bay. So all of the Chula Vista National, Coronado, South Bay, San Isidro, Sweetwater. And then about a year after I started that position, they asked me to come back and be the director here. So I've been doing that now for a couple of years, and it was difficult coming here in a pandemic, to say the least. That was quite the challenge. But what you'll find out when we talk through today is transitions are varied. We have our students who are transitioning into middle school, into high school, and making a transition into adult life, whether that's college, whether they're just going into a job, whether they're going, to the community, right? So many transitions our students make, and Sweetwater has a big job in supporting your students with that. I want you to know that part of an IEP is supporting your student in their goals for when they leave here. Okay, that's called the post-secondary goals. And those goals are really meant to help students gain skills so that they can be ready to take that first step. Okay, I don't know any of you, what might have been your first job you ever had? What was the first job you ever had?
Pick up the trashes.
Okay. Okay, I was at Little Caesars. I used to make pizzas, wash dishes. Yeah, I mean, that first step, right? That's what we're talking about. It's that first step. It's not making sure they go to become a lawyer. It's taking that first step, right? There's a lot of skills that go along with that first step. And it might not be the dream job, that first job, right? It's just that first step. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we do here. Certainly, it's important for us to make sure all students have a meaningful educational experience, that we are partners in family and community, are equal partners. It can get tense, right? When kids struggle, it's frustrating for the student. It's frustrating for the parents sometimes because we don't know what to do to help. It can be frustrating sometimes for a teacher because they have many students, right? And so it's important that we all come together every time we're noticing there's difficulty, so we can work together in finding the best solution. Because sometimes the first thing we try in solving a problem isn't the thing that actually works, right? Sometimes when we try something We go, ooh, that's not working right. Let's come back together. Let's try something else. And in lieu of pointing fingers, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing or whatever, okay, this isn't working. Can we come back together and talk about this again? And that's important because it's this team effort that continues to move our student forward, because that student is always the focus, right? And then working collaboratively to support the students, and like I said, in their chosen pathway, right? And life goals, whatever that might be. So a little background on what we mean by certificate of completion versus diploma. There are, I don't like to call them pathways because they're very different and serve very different purposes. When we think about a certificate of completion, we're thinking about a student who is able to complete high school, but not necessarily able to meet all the graduation requirements. They might not be able to be at the same level as their non-disabled peers and taking that grade level curriculum. They still celebrate in the ceremonies. They still participate and walk in a graduation ceremony, but what they receive is a certificate that they attended. And so that's the difference between that and a diploma, where the student is able to meet all of the requirements. Those requirements are set by the state of California. They have specific criteria that all students in the state of California must meet in order to receive a diploma. Okay. When we talk about requirements, this is what I mean by the difference. I said they must pass that grade level curriculum. For a certificate of completion, it is truly the IEP that drives that progress. So the student IEP, when they are able to make progress on their goals, they might not always meet them, but they make progress on those goals, we're able to continue to promote them. Okay. Curriculum modification means there is a significant change to how the student is either receiving the information, to the level of difficulty the information is, or how they can demonstrate what they know to a teacher. And so a significant change means a modification. And when we have those significant changes to curriculum, then we are typically following a certificate of completion. Okay. What you'll notice over here under diploma, it is not necessarily a modification. It's what we call an accommodation, which is a milder approach. So it might be the student might require assistance in reading the text. They might need a little key vocabulary to help them remember what some of those key words were when they're taking the test. It might mean that we offer it in a different location, but it's the same test the other students are taking. We might give them extra time to do an assignment, right? Sometimes out of 10 questions, we'll say, teacher, we expect that you are able to provide us 8 of those questions that the student must answer, and you can eliminate 2 to allow the student time to focus, which still demonstrates they're able to do it. It's not less difficult. It's just demonstrating in a different way. Braille does not change. Like that's the example I leave when we have students who might be blind. They read a text right through Braille with their fingers, but that doesn't change the text. It doesn't change what they're reading. It just changes how they read it. So some students have to listen. They have to listen to it while they're reading it. So we have what's called book share, and students can hear the text while they're reading it because they need both of those stimulated in order to internalize and understand what they're reading. And those are just accommodations. And then the last thing I wanted to note about the differences between certificate of completion and diploma is the transition service delivery. All students mandated in an IEP receive what's called a transition plan. Now, students who are in a diploma program will initiate that before age 16. Typically, we started in 9th or 10th grade. And then what we do is after they've actually received that diploma, they no longer receive any services. An IEP is done, okay? Now, we'll get more into that. I'll explain that a little bit deeper. But on the certificate of completion, a student completes 12th grade, they walk and they get that certificate of attendance, but then after that, they're able to receive transition services through a program, and they continue in our district in that transition program until age 22. Okay, so those students who are in a transition program, what do you think they're learning? They're probably not learning necessarily to go to college. They're probably learning how to access the community using transportation. They're learning some job skills. They're getting some training out in the community, how to access maybe recreation. We want our students to stay fit. They're learning to cook. They're learning to clean and fold their clothes. They're learning sometimes those daily living skills. There are a multitude of items that students need to learn when they are not able to receive that diploma, because the skill sets that they need, we want them to be as independent as they possibly can, right? You gonna let me? So many times we have, I don't know, do we have any middle school parents here? Oh, okay. So it's interesting because we actually start having that conversation in middle school. We ask parents, where do you see your student? Do you see your student receiving a certificate of completion? Do you see them receiving a diploma? And we look at that progress. Remember, we said it's that, are they doing IEP goals that aren't necessarily at grade level, or are they following the grade level? Uh-huh.
My son started to have more like
Mhm.
They modification
Mhm.
and I know he's very smart. He's
Mhm.
but I really want
Mhm.
to ever want to be and in case well, he said he's gonna go to college and he said he's gonna go to I mean it's like he's like it's like you know like he has his dreams
Mhm.
like over here.
Right.
He's like
Yeah. There's a lot of kids that think that.
and he's 16,
Mhm.
but you know
Well, that'll be very difficult.
it's so my concern is
Mhm. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. There's definitely some services we're going to talk about and what that can look like for that student. And we start having that conversation here in middle school because we're already thinking about that 12th grade. Are they going to continue on with us for 4 years, or are they going to go on to either college, work, or community, and pursuing other things? And so just so you're aware, that's when that conversation begins. And that's why, because we have a lot of planning to do in support of that student's program. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I know. I wouldn't mind. Well, and the thing is we have people in here too. I'm not sure if I do have people. If anybody's out there, hi. But why don't we do this? I only have 20 slides. I think we should have enough time at the end, but if you have paper and pen, make sure you write down those questions you have. Because if we can't get to them, then afterwards we can sit and talk. Absolutely. So just a quick, I wanted to go over an overview, you know, how students qualify or become eligible for special education services is determined through 3 different criteria. Quite often people believe it's just an assessment, but it is actually much more than that. And it's something that you alluded to earlier. So they must meet the criteria for that disability. That's that assessment piece. In addition to the assessment saying they meet the criteria, the student's disability that we've identified must affect them so much so that their educational performance is lacking. Okay, we need to see a significant difficulty that a student is having without the IEP. And then the last one is the needs of the student can't be met through some accommodation, because there is such a thing as a 504 plan, we're going to talk about that in a minute, that allows for accommodation. And if students can, even if they are eligible, but with accommodation are able to manage within the general education, then we typically don't want to say they need this, because it creates sometimes more of a dependence, and they maybe over accommodate with an IEP as opposed to being able to do it with everybody else with the 504. The 13 disability categories are these. You'll notice we have differences between a hearing impairment and deafness. The difference between those is there's quite often individuals nowadays, there's been surgical procedures, and they're able to have an apparatus that's put in their ear. So many students are able to have hearing with the assistance of speech support. They sometimes have to read some lips. They might need a speaker in the classroom to make sure it's reaching their device. Sometimes the speaker in the classroom is connected to the device, so the student can hear it directly. But those are the differences between those two. And orthopedic impairment is more of a physical impairment. And let's see, anything else? The most common one is your specific learning disability or other health impairment. Okay, other health impairment typically encapsulates a student who might have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which means they can either over focus on too much, or they have a lack of focus on what they need, right? Or they have impulsivity needs that they sometimes take medication for, okay? It's basically something that alters their ability. So a 504 plan differs in that they can qualify them if they have that physical or mental health disability, but it must limit these other abilities. So it could limit their ability to walk, breathe, eat, or sleep. It could affect their ability to communicate, see, hear. That could affect their ability to read, concentrate, think, or learn, and or stand, bend, lift, or work. So what I wanted to show you is a little bit of a difference between the 504 and an IEP, okay? The differences here have to do with the law that governs them. So on IEP, you have the Individuals with Disabilities Act, Education Act. For the 504, you actually have the Office of Civil Rights, which is the Rehabilitation Act, okay? The departments are two different departments that oversee each one of these. For the IDEA or the IEP, it's going to be Department of Education. They have a division specifically dedicated to special education. And for the 504, it's actually the Office of Civil Rights. Eligibility, we kind of talked a little bit already. What is included? You'll notice under the IEP, you have accommodations and or modifications, just like you do in the 504. But in an IEP, in addition to those accommodations, we have services. And those services is what distinguishes an IEP from that 504. The age limits are also interesting to note. An IEP is only offered through 12th grade or until the student exits our program at age 22, okay? The 504 is for life. That means a 504 that starts in school carries over into college, carries over into the workplace, and carries over into any other community place. They are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act and should be able to access those accommodations wherever it is they need to access them. We'll talk a little bit more about that after or later. Where these are used, that's what I was just alluding to. An IEP is only in the high school or elementary, high school, what have you. It does not transfer into college. You can take your IEP to the college and say, my student had an IEP, or your student shows their IEP and says that, And what they say is, okay, thank you. Can we also have a report? Can we also have evidence of what was used? They bring all of that information, and typically they're going to accept it and they're going to provide accommodation to the student. But certainly something I would highly recommend for many people is to seek, if they're going into the college or the workplace, to be able to have, if they don't qualify or receive regional services, then they should be receiving Department of Rehabilitation services and access a 504. And we'll talk a little bit more about that one too. As far as discipline goes, in the school systems, whether you have an IEP or a 504, if a student is suspended and there's consideration if a student might be expelled, we must hold what's called a manifestation determination. What that means is we all sit down and we talk about, hey, this event that occurred that resulted in a negative consequence, is it the result of this student having this disability? And if it is, then it's not their fault, because they can't help that they have a disability. You don't choose to have a disability. It's something you're born with. It's something you have. And so we cannot expel a student for that. And so it's important to know that, right? Okay. Now, this is the next step I was going to talk about. I talked about IDEA or IEP, talked a little bit about the 504, and then I wanted to talk to you post-school. Is your 504 continuing, or ADA, which is Americans with Disabilities Act, or FERPA, which has to do with privacy laws, okay? And the reason these are important to know is because right here in IEP, we are assigning somebody through the district that supports that student. We are assigning a team that meets every year to discuss that IEP. We provide services. We might have special education classes. We provide free evaluation. We provide that free evaluation for the disability. Every year we meet and talk about that IEP. We make goals. We talk about progress on those goals. And then we have a case manager that goes out and supports this student with the IEP in all of their classes with all of their teachers. You can see there's a specific person within the system, the district, that is driving this. In the 504, it's similar. There's more responsibility put on student and parent and teacher. So IDEA, IEP is mostly the school is doing all of this. 504, all three, student, parent, and teachers agree to provide their accommodations. Outside of the school systems, ADA, the biggest difference is this: students have to advocate for themselves. They're the ones who need to make the appointments. If I want to call for my child who graduated with an IEP, which I did have a child who graduated with an IEP, I wanted to call to make an appointment with the counselor. They won't make it with me at the college. They make it with him. If I wanted my student to be able to receive some counseling and initiate that counseling, it's him. If I want to make sure my student receives accommodations in their test that's going to be tomorrow, guess who has to initiate that? Him. That's a big jump. We're doing all of this for them, but by the time they leave, they need to know how to do it for themselves, because nobody can do it for them. They're not going to make the appointment. They'll let you come in with him, of course, but it's very important for us to be working on those self-advocacy skills. We're going to talk a little bit about what that can look like for you. This was the point I wanted to make about when you transition from the high school setting to college. It's really important to have this information. Within that last year of school, that senior year, it's going to be most important to receive the student's last IEP. You're going to want to be able to have the most recent evaluation report. Some students come to us after having a report done perhaps in 6th grade. Every 3 years, parents have the option to reevaluate. Sometimes what you do is you say, well, I don't know, he's making progress. I don't know that we really need to reevaluate. If we're all in agreement that we just continue, we can continue. And they provide a summary of what that could look like. Now, what happens though, is that if you continue to do those summaries, you need to have that report from 6th grade along with the summaries from every 3 years. And when you get to a college or a location and all you have, the most recent report is from when your student was 6th grade, 11 or 12, and they're now accessing college at 18, they might want to have a more recent assessment to be sure. So it is one of those things that sometimes you want to consider, but make sure you have that summary from every 3 years that verifies that your student continued to be eligible. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, there's what's called the post-secondary exit summary. So when a student is exiting, whether it's after 12th grade to receive the diploma, or when they're 22 and they're exiting out of their transition program, we provide them an exit summary. And what that does is it takes the language from the IEP and it makes it look more accessible to a workplace environment or a college setting or a community setting in an adult care facility. Because the language in an IEP can be somewhat jargony. There's a lot of language in there. And this post-second exit summary is much more user-friendly and can transition into a 504, much simpler. So making sure that you have those items when your student exits. This is just a reminder, those things. The other thing that's really important that a lot of parents don't always do, I can be just as guilty, but because we cross the border so often, we have our passports and sentries and all that good stuff. But a California ID is going to be pretty important, whether it's a driver's license or an ID. And then that social security card is also very important, and they must have the signature on the back, even if it's just a little whatever. That's important to have. We here in the district, we have work programs and we support our students in getting first-time work experiences. All students with disabilities have that access, just so you know. It's called Workability. And it's that first-time job experience. But the thing that's most important that quite often we have to help parents do is go back to Social Security and get that Social Security card. They'll reissue it. It's a little process, but costs, I don't know, $12. Maybe it's changed, but and getting that before the student can work, right? Because we have to report it. Oh, and whatever that post-secondary thing is, I highly recommend you visit those places with your student. You know, having a feel for what that looks like, what those interests are. So I talked a little bit originally about self-advocacy. Okay, that's self-determination is probably one of the most important factors for a student. Because remember, at that end, when they come out, they're the ones who are advocating for themselves. They're the ones who are asking for the support. So they really need to have a belief in themselves. Sometimes having an IEP, sometimes a student might be like, oh, why do I have to do this? I don't want to have this piece of I don't want people to sit around a table and talk about me. I often tell students who have IEPs, and told my own son, I think an IEP is a gift I wish I had, because I didn't know what my strengths were. I didn't know what I needed to be successful in a classroom setting until I failed and found out I needed more. An IEP provides, and I don't know if you recall, but kind of on that those second pages you have this list of student strengths. You have this list of present levels. And then at the end in that services page, you have this whole list of accommodations, all the things that you need to be successful in that setting. You need to sit towards the front of the classroom. I found that out later. I always wanted to sit in the back because it was always cool to sit in the back. I didn't really think that, oh yeah, maybe I should sit in front because I have a really hard time listening. I'm the type of person who has to write things down. If I don't write them down, I'm going to walk away from that conversation and I'm going to go, oh, what was it they asked me to do? I know they asked me to do something. If I don't write it down, I'm struggling to remember that later. That's the gift of an IEP. You have that list of things that can really support you. Knowing how you want your future to be and how to plan for that future. One thing I think sometimes our students struggle with when they come out of school, I've had 3 kids now graduate. I've got my last one is a sophomore right now. The hardest thing is I don't want to say that I want to do this one thing because what if I change my mind? What if I don't like it? That's okay. I started off at Little Caesars. We talked about our first jobs. It didn't mean I wanted to own a pizza joint later on. It's okay. I started school and I thought I was going to be a chiropractor. I remember that because I used to crack my dad's back. He had a bad back. And so I used to crack his back. I was like, oh, and he would, oh, you do that perfect, Michelle. So I was like, oh, that's it. I'm going to be a chiropractor. So I went to school. Yeah, no, I didn't become a chiropractor and I didn't even become a teacher. Then I changed my mind. I said I was going to be a psychologist. My dad was a psychologist. That's what I want to do. Went to school for 4 years. I didn't like that either. So then I ended up going back to school again. I worked as a secretary. I worked, in multiple jobs until I found myself back at school becoming a special education teacher. So it's a pathway. We get there eventually. It's okay if you change your mind and nobody's going to judge you for changing your mind. We all have our own path. But knowing that you have that future and you have the ability to change your mind and do different things is okay. And those supports, that's that list of services, supports, and aids that all students have on their IEP. There's some research that has been done about students who have more determination and goals and buy-in to their IEP. We really encourage students to attend their IEPs, but they're more likely to earn higher incomes 1 year after graduation because they have some goals. Right? They're able to, when we can incorporate choice-making opportunities, it improves their behavioral outcomes. I don't know if you've ever had journaling. That's something that quite often, if you have students specifically after the pandemic, it was difficult for a lot of students. And so I had my own daughters, hey, how are you doing in the morning? Just, here's these faces, circle where you are. In the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and having an idea of throughout your day, when are you at your best? And they found they were at their best more in the afternoon and evenings. They weren't very good in the mornings. And so that helps us understand how they can plan for themselves and not to be too hard on themselves when they don't do well in the morning. Because, oh yeah, that's right, I don't do so well in the morning, that's okay. I can do better later. And then problem solving skills. It can really help somebody to know it's okay not to get everything right. I often say, babies don't come out of the womb walking. They crawl. Well, actually, first they don't do a whole lot. But then they learn in stages. And do they fall? Oh, yes, they fall. They fall a lot, but that's how they learn. And so it's okay to fall. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to get a failing grade. That's all part of learning. There's this thing called a cognitive struggle. If it's kind of hurting your brain, you're like, I'm not getting it. This doesn't make sense. That's a time to celebrate. I used to have a jar of jelly beans in my classroom, and a student, when they were having that feeling, they were getting frustrated and I can't get it. All right, it's time for a jelly bean, because guess what? You're learning. This is something new for you. Guess what? I can't wait to find out what happens at the other side of this, because we're getting there now. If everything's easy and I can always do what it is I've always been able to do, there's not a whole lot of learning going on. So failing is a part of us learning. How can you support your students? Well, talking to them about the process of goal setting and anticipating difficulties. So let's say I set a goal to get an A in my math class, all right? Well, what are some things that are going to be barriers for me? Well, I really have a hard time when it comes to the story problems because reading, I struggle with the reading part. Okay, well, knowing that you're going to struggle with reading, what are some things that we can do to help you with that? Let's plan for that barrier. Let's make sure we come up with at least 1 or 2 ideas that are going to help you with that. Okay, those are realistic goals. We don't jump from, an F to an A. we have to go through a process. It's just like the baby walking, right? Helping your student to understand the concept of accommodations. That IEP, like I said, it is a gift. Supporting a student in understanding that IEP and knowing what it is they need is really how they can advocate for themselves. If there is a test coming up and the student is aware that they might be distracted too much in that classroom, and on their IEP it says they may request a different setting. If your student just says, I never do get in these tests, I'm just gonna answer whatever here, there becomes this sense of what we call learned helplessness. I'm just gonna accept that I have this limitation. I'm just gonna do whatever I can, as opposed to, oh yeah, that's right, I do need a better setting, and I'm aware that I need that setting, and being able to go and ask for it. Now, it doesn't have to be in front of the other students. So practicing with your student, even write it on a piece of paper, write a script, how to ask your teacher for the help, because it can be embarrassing asking for help sometimes. Kids struggle with that. Adolescence alone is difficult, right? Talking out in class, raising my hand. Who wants to do that, right? So those can be difficult things. Talking to them about their disability. And then also that plan for the future. Keep that future in mind, because that graduation or age 22 will be here before you know it. My oldest just turned 28 on Thursday, and I cannot believe it. It's nuts that that comes along so fast. So one of those suggestions was talking to your student about their disability. So the way you talk about it isn't necessarily talking about the part that's wrong. We talk about all the parts that are right. We talk about the abilities. What are the strengths, right? What are their talents? What are their gifts? And then there's learning differences in all of our families. I know when my son first started with his IEP, my husband had a hard time with it. It wasn't something he necessarily grew up having an understanding of. He grew up in Tijuana, Mexico. They didn't have special education. They didn't have IEPs. And getting a diagnosis of being different might not have been something you wanted to draw attention to. And it was hard for him to hear at first. And then he started noticing all the things that are symptoms of it. So our child had ADHD, impulsivity, and he got in trouble and threw a backpack. You know, there was some things that happened. And he was like, oh yeah, well, I can remember when I was young, I did that. And yeah, I remember getting in trouble when I had to stand in line in second grade and then I'm having to go home, got sent to the principal's office. And, you know, he's like, you know what? I might have some of that too. And so helping a student to understand it's not unique to you. I told you about how I have a difficult time listening. I need to write things down. Now, I don't have an IEP, but I certainly know that I need that in order to be successful. So all of us have strengths and all of us have weaknesses in areas. And this is just another way to explain it. Again, describing the use of accommodations in their daily life, what that can look like for them. It's going to be important in different classrooms. There are different expectations that teachers have. So an accommodation could look different in different settings, helping them to understand that. And then keeping the focus on the student, right? It's really important that we cherish our uniqueness. If we were all the same, it wouldn't be a very effective world, would it? We need uniqueness in order for us to grow. We each bring different perspectives to all situations, and it's important for all those perspectives to factor in when we grow and learn. And then always talking about the person first. We always say in special education, person first language. We don't say an autism student, we say a student with autism. They're a human being first, and recognizing that we're all human beings. I mentioned earlier, we highly recommend you allow your student to participate in the IEP in 504. Maybe prepare them for it. Ask for the IEP ahead of time so you can read through it with them, see if they have questions. When students take charge of their learning, the responsibility shifts easier from teacher-parent to student. When the students participate in that goal setting, then they actually have a vested interest in achieving those goals. And at times when students might have inappropriate behaviors, they tend to decrease as students feel empowered to chart their own progress. So perhaps there's a place or a time that you review goals with your student and say, well, you have a goal in math. How's math going? Do a check-in every couple weeks. You know, sometimes time can get away from us and all of a sudden missing assignments mount up and then the student's grade falls drastically. And then they kind of give up. They're like, oh, I'm so far behind. I can't even do this now. But if we have some timelines that we check along the way, we can help and we can support. We can say, you know what, I noticed things are struggling. Maybe we should call a meeting. Let's go meet with the teacher. Oh, I don't want. We'll do it quick. 15 minutes. We'll just talk. See if there's something I can do to help you here at home. See if something teacher can do, right? But it helps us to stay on track. And then the very last thing to share with you is, you know, keep that future in mind. I know if your student's in middle school, it's hard to think that far ahead, but services and supports do end after graduation or age 22. We want you to be able to use us to the maximum extent that we can help you. So let's think about that. And there is eligibility determination within the community. So your students do still have rights. It shifts from services to rights. But one thing to keep in mind, if your student goes to college or they go to a new place and they do not disclose their disability and they do not let them know, I need these accommodations, please write me a 504. The school and the workplace do not have the responsibility to give it to him. So if he fails without asking for the support, he fails because we did not access that right. So that's the key between learning to self-advocate and fight for those rights, right? As opposed to, I think I can do it without. I've seen so many students. I have my first students from Montgomery High who are my friends on Facebook telling me, I remember when you made me go through my IEP. I had my students lead their own IEP their senior year. And it was very empowering because they were able to use them and go on to community college and use that IEP to support them. So yeah, in the end, students have to advocate for their own needs and explain to others what they need to be successful.